Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Nat Bar Nat. And you might be wondering, what is Nat Bar Nat? And I'll tell you what Nat Bar Nat is. Nat Bar Nat is a rabbinic abbreviation for Notein Ta'am Bar, meaning the son of Notein Ta'am, which means the taste that is imparted, which means there is a double imparting of taste, which means, and I'll explain what that means, which is we're going to talk about, as my classical case, I'm cooking pasta in a meat pot. So I've got the pot, I've got boiling water, I've got pasta. And I then want to put that pasta in a milk bowl. Can I do that? Can that hot pasta, which was cooked in the meat pot, can I do that? Can I do that lechatchila? Ideally, can I do it b'diavad, after the fact, ipso facto? That's what tonight's class is all about. And furthermore, can I put on that pasta, which was cooked totally parve in a meat pot, can I put the Parmesan cheese on it? Yes or no? Is it lechatchila? Is it b'diavad? Ashkenazic, Sephardic? We're going to see all of those positions. So we have to start by looking at the Gemara. In Masechet Chulin, Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Bet, the Gemara says, Itmar. It was stated by the rabbis of the Talmud, the Amoraim, Dagim, She'alu B'Ke'ara. I took fish, and it was in a meat pot, and I go and I put it into a milk bowl. Okay, so it's no longer on the fire. It's a very simple case. Rav Amar Asur L'Ochlan Bekutach. Rav says, since the fish was cooked in a meat pot, it's forbidden to eat it with kutach, and we've talked about kutach before. Kutach is that crazy meal of bread and moldy cheese, which was a delicacy in Bavel around 1500 years ago. Kutach. So he says, so Rav says you can't do that. You can't have the fish that was cooked in the meat pot. You can't then place it into the you can't then place it into a milk bowl. Okay? Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Mutar l'ochlan bekutach. He says, you can indeed do so. What's the rationale? What is the machloket between Rav and Shmuel? Rav Amar Asur, notein tamhu. The reason why it's forbidden is because there is notein ta'am. There is flavor imparted from the meat pot to the fish. Shmuel Amar Mutar. Shmuel says it's permitted. Why? Notein tam bar notein tam. It's because the flavor is first imparted to the bowl, and only then from the bowl to the fish. Okay? Therefore, it's a case of imparted flavor derived from imparted flavor. There's a whole mixture going on here. It's not a direct fish into meat, or shall we say, the meat into the dairy. There's the meat into the fish, and then there's the fish into the dairy, and therefore it's not a problem, says Shmuel. Amar Chizkiah mishum Abaye. Chizkiah taught in the name of Abaye. Hilchata, what is the bottom line halacha? Dagim she'alu beke'ara, fish that was removed from the fire and placed into a bowl which had been used for meat. So the pot was meaty. Mutar le'ochlan bekutach. I can eat that fish which is in a meat pot, in a meat bowl. I can eat that with kutach, with dairy. Okay? So there's a number of things to try and understand here. Perhaps the reason why it's permitted is because it was cooked parve on the fire, So it was on the barbecue. You're barbecuing some fish. You place the fish. Is no longer on the fire. It's now placed in my meat bowl. And now I want to take that, and it's just resting in the meat bowl. I now want to take that fish out of the meat bowl and place it on the dairy and have it with my kutach. Perhaps the reason why this Gemara is permitted is because the meat bowl is not on the heat source. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that even if it was being cooked, it would still be permitted. Guess what, friends? It's a machloket rishonim. The rabbis of the medieval period, the classic rabbis, Rashi, Tosfot, Rambam, Rashba, the Beit Yosef, they're all discussing this. The first approach is brought down in the name of Rashi. B'shem Rashi Piresh Rivan, the Rivan explains in the name of Rashi. Chatno, that's a son-in-law of Rashi, okay? Davka alu sharu, only when it was removed from the fire and placed in a bowl is it permitted. Aval nitbashlu asur tekachad taima chashiv. But if it was cooked in a meat pot, then it would be forbidden, because then it would be considered chad ta'ama, which is echad ta'am, one taste. Okay, and therefore it would be notein ta'am, but not Nat Bar Nat, notein ta'am, bar notein ta'am. Okay? So the first position is, I've got to be medayek, I've got to read specifically the Gemara. What's going on here? It's taken from the fire and placed in a meat bowl, but the meat bowl is not on the fire. Therefore, if it was a meat pot that the fish was cooked in, I wouldn't be able to have that fish with dairy. Okay? That's position of Tosfot, Rashi, Rivan, etc. Now, another approach, which is the Bet Yosef. The Bet Yosef, remember, is Rav Yitzhak Kairo's main work, where he wrote his magnum opus on the Torah. Here, he's quoting a lot of Sephardic Rishonim. He says as follows, Dagim rotchin miyad, concerning hot fish that is placed immediately into a bowl, and it's placed in a bowl, exactly what it says in the Gemara. Harashba v'haran hiskimu denit bashelu sharet. The Rashba of Shimon ben Aderet and the Ran Rabbeinu Nisim, they both agree that if you were to also cook it in a meat pot, not just place it in a meat bowl after cooking it, but cooking it in a meat pot, it would be shareh. That too would also be mutar, permitted. Ela shenireh midivrehem she'enam mechalkim bein nitzlu le'bashlu. And not only that, it seems from their words that they don't disagree if it's roasted or boiled. Okay, is it roasted on the fire or is it cooked with water? And that's also the piece of the Ravya. V'zikno, and his grandfather Shekatav Mordechai, and his grandfather the Mordechai wrote. And so did these Ashkenazic Rishonim, which is the Ravya, the Mordechai, the Hagot Ashirei. And he quotes the Ri of Orléans, another French Ashkenazic rabbi. Nireh halacha lema'aseh, to the practical halacha, de'en chiluk ben alul nitbashlu v'hakol shareh. There's no distinction whether it went up and then was placed in the bowl while hot, or whether it was cooked in the meat pot. Hakol shareh, all is permitted to be eaten with dairy. V'chen kibel merabenu tam, and so writes the Rabbeinu Tam, which is interesting. He's arguing again with his uncle Rashi, his grandfather Rashi. And not only is he arguing with his grandfather, he's probably arguing with his uncle, the Rivan. Very interesting there. רבינו תם שהורה כן הלכה למעשה. ואם היו מחלקים בין צלייה לבישול, לא הווה למשתק מיני. And since these rabbis don't argue between roasting and cooking, they would not have been silent about the matter. וכן נראה שהוא דעת הרמב"ם. And that is the position also of the Rambam. So I've got heavy hitters here. Rambam, Rashba, and Ran, who are all of the Sephardic approach. And I've got the Mordechai, Rabbeinu Tam, I got Ashire, I got the Ria von Lyon, I got a lot of big Ashkenazic and Sephardic Rishonim here, which the Beit Yosef is quoting. Then I have a middle ground approach brought down by the Rosh. And he writes...
Excuse me, can I just ask, so it doesn't, in terms of the fish, whether was cooked parve or in a fleshik or in a meat pot, then it's, and you put it on a meat dish, it doesn't matter, or on a dairy dish, this is what they're saying, that it can still be eaten, whether it's on dairy as a dairy or in a meat as a meat. Is that it?
Correct. That's exactly what's going on here.
Okay.
Trying to establish, if I've got, and I'll just reestablish the scene. The fish in the Gemara has been cooked on a fire, and then it's taken from the fire and placed in a meat bowl, which had been used for meat within the last 24 hours. According to Rav, you can't have that with dairy. According to Shmuel, you can, and the halacha is like Shmuel. Now, the Rishonim are arguing, is that only when it was cooked in the fire and then was placed in a meat bowl? That's the position of Rashi. And then I have these other major Sephardic and Ashkenazic Rishonim who say no, even cooking in a meat pot, even roasting on a meat pot would be fine. The third approach in source number 4 is the Rosh. And the Rosh here, and I told you again, the Rosh is very important because the Rosh came from Germany in the 1400s, and he escaped persecution and came to Spain, okay, in the late 1300s, early 1400s. He writes that in the Sefer Truma, Hitir yirakotu kitniyot shnit bashlu b'kedera bat yoma cholevet. He would permit vegetables and legumes that were cooked in a pot that had been used for dairy within the last 24 hours. Provided it was clean. And he could eat that with a meat thing, with meat. ואפילו אם נאמר עלו in נצלו לו, כשבשלו שרה. And even if you're going to say that this is fine for if it was cooked but not roasted, cooking is still fine. So I have here the Rosh is saying it's fine if it was just placed in a meat pot, and it's fine if it was cooked in a roasted pot, but it can't be roasted in a meat pan. That would be a problem because there would be an issue. And why does he make the distinction? Mishum di'ika shloshe notnei ta'am hachalav b'kedera, b'kedera b'mayim, v'hamayim b'yerek. V'odenu heter. Why is it? When it's cooked in the pot, I have the taste of the dairy in the pot, I have the pot into the water, and I have the water then imparting it into the vegetables. But when I'm roasting something, I don't have that water interspersing. And that's why he's strict with roasting, but not strict with cooking. And therefore it seems that cooking has this third thing. It's almost like it's Nat Bar Nat Bar Nat. There's a triple nat there. Aval nitzlu asur, but roasting is forbidden. So if you look at this table, it makes everything clear. I've got my fish in a meat dish. Opinions. I've got Rivan quoting Rashi, I got the Rosh, and I got Rambam and most of the Rishonim. For Rashi, since it's cooked in the meat pot, whether it's roasted or cooked, it's out. For the Rosh, it's the middle ground. You can't roast it, but you can cook it. With the Rambam and the other Rishonim, as we saw, were quoted by the Bet Yosef, both roasting and cooking is permitted, and all of the Rishonim agree that if it's permitted if it's just placed from the fire into the meat pot, into the meat plate cold, then it would be able to eat it with dairy. Now, the Ran adds, and the Ran's on the pagination of the Rif, Rabbeinu Nisim on the pages of the Rif, he adds, Have Yodea, and you should know, the Lo Sharinim Nat Bar Nat, Ela B'Shel Heter. This whole permissibility is when both flavors being imparted are permitted. For example, the meat by itself is kasher, the dairy by itself is kasher. They're only forbidden together, but you wouldn't permit this if it was one of the tastes was non-kosher. Dekevan detam sheni akatu heterahu kevan de aklish kulehai lo chashiv lemesar. He says here, since the second flavor is still a permitted one, i.e. the flavor emitted from the meat pot when the pareve food is cooked, since it is so weak, it's not significant enough to forbid. Aval b'midei di'isura kol hecha di'ikatar maklal oser ad sof kol ha'olam. But an item that is forbidden, any case where there is any flavor at all, it forbids it forever. Okay? So this concept of Nat Bar Nat only works for basar and chalav. Now, let's see this in the Shulchan Aruch. And as you won't be surprised, the Shulchan Aruch is going to follow that position of the Rambam, which we saw there in source number 3 by the Bet Yosef. And he quotes as follows, Shulchan Aruch, fish, shenitbashlu or shenatzlu, if they are cooked, or even if they are roasted, the kedera shel basar, in a meat pot, rechutza yafeh, that was rinsed out well, she'ein shum shuman divuka, where there's no sort of residue stuck to it, there's no fat residue there, meat like the shuman, the fat. Mutar le'ochla bekutach, it is permitted to eat it with this dairy dish. Mishum tahave nat bar nat dehetera, because this is considered it's a permitted imparted taste to an imparted taste. V'im lo hayta rechutza yafa, but if it wasn't cleaned out well, im yesh b'mamash al pi hakadera yoter me'achad mishishim b'dagim, asur le'ochlam bekutach. But if you were lazy and you didn't cook out your meat pan, let's say you were making, some beef and you were searing the meat in the pan, and then you didn't wash it in between, and then you wanted to pan sear some fish. In that case, you wouldn't be able to have the pan seared fish with dairy, okay? That pan seared fish should only be eaten on meat plates. Because of the issue of perhaps there would be more than the ratio of 1 in 60 would be a problem. Okay, and again, we don't want to get into that issue of the ratios in that kind of scenario. Okay. Marilyn's asking, but you wouldn't mix it in a hot dairy food. So here's the question, Marilyn. It's a great question you're asking. Let's say I've got, and again, I'm trying to do the classical case of my pasta. I'm cooking my pasta in a meat pot. I actually got this question from a congregant on Friday, called me all in a panic. And she said, I forgot and I boiled the pasta in a dairy pot. Can I use that to make a cold pasta salad with meat? And I said, yes, absolutely. Not a problem, based on this principle that we're learning here. And we're going to see even with the Ramah, ipso facto, after the fact, you can do so. Now, to Marilyn, your question, could I then take the pasta that was cooked in a meat pot? Could I then cool it down, move it, and then reheat it in a, what do you call that sauce, Sharona, that dairy sauce? That bechamel sauce? There you go, bechamel sauce. Absolutely. Again, provided that the pot was totally clean. It doesn't need to be more than 24 hours old. It needs to be clean. So if you've got a thoroughly clean pot, there's no meat being transferred there. And therefore, yes, even the pot being cooked for Sephardim, based on the Shulchan Aruch, lechatchila, it's permitted. We're going to now see the Ramah. It's not so clear, so just Marilyn, just keep on listening, and I will see here the Ramah. The Ramah says, "V'yesh machmirin b'tzliah." There are those who are stringent concerning roasting ubishul and cooking, le'asur, to forbid it, being Nat Bar Nat, and that was the position of Rashi. V'aminag le'asur lechatchila, and the Ashkenazic custom is to be strict, ideally, but b'diavad, after the fact. And remember, the question in kashrut is, the woman who called me didn't say, can I? I've already done it. Then, mutar b'chol inyan. Then it's permissible in every case. Udavka le'echol im chalav v'habasar atzmo. And this applies specifically when eating it with dairy or meat itself. Aval lidnan bekle shelahem, but to place them in their pots, mutar lechatchila, even that's permitted, ideally for Ashkenazim, v'chein nahagu, and so we are established. So for example, let's say I cook, and I'm Ashkenazic, and I cook meat. I cook pasta in a meat pot. I can then cook it in a dairy pot, provided that I'm not using any dairy. Can I then do your question, Marilyn, which is, can I then add it and cook it in a dairy pot? I would say that's permitted for Ashkenaz, for Sephardim, but only for Ashkenazim if you'd already gone to the next step. And you called me not after cooking it in the meat pot, but you say, I cooked it in the meat pot, and now I've cooked it a second time in the dairy pot, can I do it? And that's the position there. Therefore, if one had not yet cooked it or roasted it initially, rak alu bekeli shel basar, it had just been placed in a meat utensil, mutar le'ochlan im chalav atzmo, it would be permitted to eat them with dairy itself, v'chein lehefech. So, just to explain, the Ramah is a little bit complicated there. According to the Ramah, lechatchila, ideally, we are stringent concerning cooking pareve food in a meat dish, like approach number 1 of Rashi, that it should not be eaten with dairy. But b'diavad, after the fact, it is permitted to eat the pareve food with dairy. But what exactly do lechatchila and b'diavad mean in this context? What cases is the Ramah referring to? The Shach, one of the super commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, explains that the case of lechatchila, of ideal, is where one can avoid eating it together with dairy, which one should do. The b'diavad case, on the other hand, is where it was already mixed with dairy, in which case one may nevertheless eat the food. So here, if I've already mixed it with the dairy and you're calling me, do I need to throw it out? No, you don't. But lechatchila, only for Sephardim. So it says here, minhag la'asur lechatchila, lo'chlo bekutach, to eat it with dairy. B'diavad mutar im natan bekutach. After the fact, it's permitted if you've already placed it in the dairy. So let's say, again, I've got the Sephardic home. The Sephardic home the Rubisa can ideally cook the pasta in the meat pot and then eat it with dairy. It's not, oh no, I've put it in dairy. Can I call the rabbi and make sure that I can eat it? That's a lechatchila. B'diavad, only for Ashkenazim. That's the way the Shach understands it. The Shach also has a question about the Shulchan Aruch. And he says here that the Shulchan Aruch would also have a problem with this. He says, Aval levashlan lechatchila bekedera shel basar kedei leochlam bekutach asur afilu lehamechabel siato. He says what I just explained to you, that ideally to cook in a meat pot in order to eat it with dairy. So for example, cooking the meat, the pasta in the meat pot and then putting feta cheese on it, that would be a problem even for the Shulchan Aruch. But the Yalkut Yosef says, wrong. Shach doesn't understand the Shulchan Aruch. He says, mutar lechatchila. It is permitted 100% la'afot pat, to bake bread, bekeli shel basar ben yomo, even in a meat oven, provided there's no meat inside it. Al dat le'achol apat imachlei chalav, if I want to eat that bread with dairy. Or letagen beitza b'machavat, or to fry a pan with new oil, with intent later to eat. To eat that egg with cheese. So I'm using a meat frying pan, which is clean. I eat it with cheese. So there we see the Yalkut Yosef, that's a contemporary Sephardic position, permitted. And then I tell you, if you thought it's all over, the Ben Ish Chai, the Kaf HaChaim, and the Rav Mordechai Eliyahu. So Ben Ish Chai and Kaf HaChaim are two giants of Baghdad in the late 19th, early 20th century. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was a contemporary Sephardic posek who passed away in the last 10 or 15 years. They say, Gamli Didan, also for us, Azin and Bata Maran, we follow Maran, Shulchan Aruch. Eno mutar levashel lechatchila kedera shel basar bat yoma, adata zari gedei leochlam bechalav. Ela rak im nitbashlu b'diavad, mutar leochlam lechatchila bechalav. So they say, no, if you are making plans, one should not plan to cook pasta in a meat pot and then eat it with dairy, only if that's what happened. Okay, so how we follow in the Sephardic community of Seattle, it's not that we follow the Yalkut Yosef specifically, but our minhag is to follow that ideally, without worrying about it whatsoever, we can cook pasta or fish, something parve, in a meat pot, and ideally serve it with dairy. Whereas the more strict position is only if it happened. Okay? Not that that was your ideal plan. Okay? And the Ashkenazic position being, if that's what happened, you can do it, but ideally one should not do so. Okay? So there we are. Now, one extra piece, Sarah. Okay. If one did cook the pasta in a meat pot, and one had not yet mixed it with dairy, I guess there's 3 steps here, Sarah, and I'll explain. There is, can I cook in a meat pot lechatchila to eat it with dairy? That's the Yalkut Yosef's understanding of the Shulchan Aruch. Then there is, I did it, can I lechatchila eat it with dairy? That's the Ben Ish Chai and the Kaf HaChaim and Mordechai Eliyahu. And then there's a third position is, I didn't mean to do it, and I've already mixed it with the dairy. Can I now eat it? And that's the position of the Ramah. But there was also a way of understanding the Ramah of even position number 2. Okay? Now, all that we've been saying so far is when the pot that we know for sure it's been used in the last 24 hours. But let's say I get a dairy pot, or let's forget the dairy pot, I got a meat pot, and you're in my house, and the Rabbi Sira doesn't really serve meat during the week. We only really have meat on Shabbat and leftovers, or if it's a special occasion or something. So therefore, on Friday, she's making the pasta in that meat pot. It's Eino Ben Yomo. And therefore, even for the Ramah, it's permitted. He writes here, V'chein im hayah hakeli shebashlu or netzlu bo lifgam, if the pot which was being used, the taste being imparted is lifgam, is negative because it hasn't been used for more than 24 hours, shelo haya ben yomo, nagid heter lechatchila, then it's permitted ideally. Then you can eat it with the other type. And therefore, if you know, Sarah or Marilyn, that you haven't used that meat pot for pasta, it hasn't been used for meat in a couple of days, then for sure that can then be used for dairy. Okay? Now again, I hesitate to say that because then there's the Chochma Adam and the Gra want to argue about what this means. Does he mean that it is permitted to cook a pareve food in a non-Ben Yomo meat pot with the intention of eating it with dairy? Or does he only mean that if one already did so, that one may eat it with dairy? But ideally, one should not have the intention when cooking it. The Ashkenazi Achronim dispute this question with the Gra being lenient and the Chochmat Adam being strict. Well, I always like the Vilna Gaon. The Gaon, he sounds like he's Sephardic. But Chochmat Adam, Rav Danziger, says here, I'm just a joke, Aval asur lechatchila levashel bekeli she'eno ben yomo kedei lochlo bechalav. For Rav Danziger, one shouldn't be in the practice of saying, I know I'm making a dairy pasta salad. One shouldn't be saying, because I know I'm dairy pasta, I shouldn't use a meat pot, even if it hasn't been used for 24 hours. That's source 13, whereas the Biur Hagra, the Vilna Gaon says, what are you talking about? Since it's Eno Ben Yomo, then there's Tam Lifgam, there's no problem, and therefore Mutar Medin is permitted, strictly speaking. Okay? And therefore there's no need to be stringent. Now, if you think that's good, the Sefer HaKashrut rules in line with the Chochmat Adam. So therefore, Ashkenazim should be careful of ideally using a meat pot, even if it's not been used for 24 hours, to cook pasta, which they know they're going to eat with dairy. It's only if you decided after the fact to eat it with dairy, whereas for Sephardim, totally permitted if it's more than 24 hours old for all positions. If it's less than 24 hours old, permitted for Sephardim of Seattle, permitted for the Yalkut Yosef, and for the Ben Ish Chai and the others, only if it's more than 24 hours old.
Can I ask you a question here?
Yes.
So assuming an Ashkenaz goes to a Sephardic home and they've cooked something in a meat and then serve it for a dairy. So what's the position in terms of the Ashkenaz being able to eat that food since it's not permitted? Okay.
So great question, Sarah. And I'm going to answer as a Sephardic rabbi, and might not necessarily be the answer for everyone. What I've tried to show in a lot of the classes that we've been learning here is it's not a straightforward Sephardim are always lenient and Ashkenazim are always strict. And in fact, there are a lot of things which we Sephardim are lenient on in the community. For example, whether the bread is what's known as Chadash or Yashan, or we're using old flour or new flour, Ashkenazim are very lenient on it. When it comes to Bishul Akum, allowing non-Jews to cook the food for us, Sephardim require a lot of preparation, that it's not just the fire is lit by the non-Jew, but the Jews are involved in this by the Jew. The Jew is also involved in stirring or putting the food on. and also regarding trefot, checking the lungs to make sure that it is what's known as galat, which is a Yiddish word, but checking the lungs to make sure that they are kasher. That is also something, an area, what's known as Chalak Beit Yosef, where it's very, very smooth, where there's an extra checking of the lungs. That is another area where Sephardim are much more strict. So I would say, if you're going to a God-fearing home where you know that that person keeps a kosher home and they are Sephardic, then you can rely on their leniencies and you can rely on their stringencies. The same way that if I go to your home, I can rely on you being God-fearing and that you and Josh would serve me kosher food. Now, where's there an area where that might become more complicated? Passover. For Pesach, it's a little bit more hard. And I just say generally people are less inclined. But even that, as long as the Sephardic hostess or hosts are not giving you kitniot and they're being careful not to serve it to you, then again, it wouldn't be a problem. But we know that there are sometimes situations where it's not necessarily, is it permitted or not? It's a level of comfort. And most people, when it comes to Pesach, they're not so comfortable. One of the things about COVID this year is we didn't have to accept any invitations. We didn't have to have anyone bringing any food, which is a shame. But on the other hand, it was one of those things where you don't have to worry, do they keep all the leniencies or all the stringencies that we do in making their food? So that's how I would answer it. If you trust them and you know that they're Shomer Mitzvot, I would rely on it. If you're not comfortable, then it doesn't matter if they're Ashkenazic or Sephardic, we shouldn't eat there. We're going to conclude this section on Nat Bar Nat with the following question. What is the halacha if one mistakenly used a ben yoma dairy spoon? So the spoon has been used within the last 24 hours to stir a pareve food, e.g. noodles, cooking in a ben yoma meat pot. So there's no meat in there, there's no dairy. But the spoon's been used in the last 24 hours for dairy, and the pot's been used in the last 24 hours for meat. On the one hand, this is also considered a case of permitted Nat Bar Nat, since there is no flavor of meat that ever directly comes in contact with dairy, since the food is pareve and the spoon and pot are merely utensils. On the other hand, the flavor of the meat emitted from the pot does come in contact with the flavor emitted from the dairy spoon. The Rishonim dispute the halacha in a similar case where meat bowls were washed in a dairy basin with hot water, but no actual food residue. Tosfot holds that in this case, a transfer of taste of both utensils into the water is a problem, while the Ramban, Nachmanides, posits that the food and utensils remain permitted. The question ultimately becomes a dispute again between Maran and Ramah, between the Shulchan Aruch and Rav Moshe Isserles. And here's the halacha. Ke'arot shel basar, shehuduchu biyoreh cholevet bechamin, shayad soledet bahen, afilu shnehem b'nei yoman, mutar, mishum dahav eleh nat bar nat dehetera. Concerning meat bowls that were washed in a dairy basin with hot water that were yad soledet bo. And again, friends, it's very rare that your sink ever gets this hot. I never wear gloves to do the dishes, and my wife can tell you I like doing the dishes these days. I never wear those big rubber gloves, so the water is never getting that hot. But if it was such a case, even in that case, if both of them are ben yoma, they've both been used in the last 24 hours, it's still permitted, since it's Nat Bar Nat of a permitted taste, since it's the meat is by itself is permitted, the dairy by itself is permitted, and therefore it's mutar. V'hu sheyomar barili sholei shum shuman davuk bahen. And this is if he says it is certain to me there was no residue stuck to it of the meat fat. But if there was residue stuck to it, there must be 60 times in the water to the actual residue found on the bowl. Okay, and again, you don't want to get stuck in those quantifications. In that situation, you want to be giving me a call. The Rama says, "V'yesh osrim afilu en shuman davuk bahen," even if there's no meat stuck to it, there's no meat fat stuck to it. Ela im ken echad min hakelim enan bnei yoman mebliat kli rishon, az kol hakelim mutarim, אבל אם שניהם בני יומן, והדיח אותן ביחד בכלי ראשון, הכל אסור, והכי נוהגין ואין לשנות. And he says here, unless one of the utensils has not been used in the last 24 hours from the absorption from being on the fire, and then all the utensils are permitted. But if both of them have been used in the last 24 hours, and you wash them together in a kli rishon, using something which had been used for which is attached to the fire, then everything is forbidden. And this is our custom, and one should not deviate from it. And again, this is important. This lashon, this language of hachi nohagin ve'ein leshanot, this is our custom and one should not deviate from it, is a very strict language. And that's why I don't play games with the Ashkenazim who want to change their minhag on kitniot or things like that. It's not just a minhag. It's a minhag which should not be changed. It should not be deviated from. And that is, it's not a practice of one individual person. It's the practice of Ashkenazic communities for hundreds of years. According to the Shulchan Aruch, one may wash clean meat dishes inside a dairy basin, even if both are bein yomah, as the case is one of permitted Nat Bar Nat, while the Rama holds that this is forbidden and the utensils also become non-kosher. And here's a funny question where you could actually have a scenario where a Sephardi is using the same sink for his meat and dairy dishes, whereas Ashkenazi, they can't at all. The Taz writes that the same dispute applies to using a dairy spoon inside a meat pot with Pareve food. And therefore, here's the case, and it could be there's another scenario where we're lenient for Sephardim, but not for Ashkenazim. If one was cooking water, or yirakot, or vegetables, you're heating up water or you've got vegetables in there, in a dairy pot that had been used in the last 24 hours, and you put in there a meat spoon because you weren't being careful, which had been used in the last 24 hours, and there isn't 60 times the amount of water compared to the size of the spoon, then they render each other forbidden. Even if both of them are well clean. And even though this is exactly the same case as the bowls washed in the basin mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, Mikol Makom, nevertheless, I've never recorded also since it is very common. Okay? And therefore, for Sephardim, it would be permitted. For Ashkenazim, it would be a problem, and it would require a kashering process. Okay? You see there in footnote number 10, the Taz here is following the stringent opinion of the Rama. The Shach notes, though, that even according to the lenient opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, lechatchila, ideally one should not wash ben yomah dairy and meat dishes together in hot water. If so, then one should also not insert a meat spoon into dairy pot with Pareve food lechatchila, according to the Shulchan Aruch. So here it's saying, b'diavad, there's no problem for Sephardim, but lechatchila they shouldn't do it. But for the Ashkenazim, there might be a problem, not only b'diavad, but it might also require kashering of that said spoon. Okay, so here is some scenarios. Here's a summary of the different positions. I have the case, the Pareve food cooked in a ben yomah meat dish, Shulchan Aruch Sephardim, you can eat it with dairy. Rama Ashkenazim, you can't eat it with dairy lechatchila. Cooking Pareve in a meat dish with intent to eat with dairy, Shach ben Ish Chai forbidden. Yakut Yosef and Sephardim of Seattle permitted. Ramah Ashkenazim forbidden. Cooking parve in a non-ben yoma meat dish with intent to eat with dairy permitted. Chochmat Adam forbidden lechatchila. Gra permitted, but as we said, the Ashkenazim normally follow the position of the Chochmat Adam. Dairy spoon used in a meat pot with parve food permitted. Everything is forbidden if utensils are both ben yoma. See the Ramah there. All right, that is what we were going to learn tonight. And to next week, live on our show, we're going to be looking about one of my favorites called Davar Charif. And all bets are off when it's spicy food.